Hi guys. Wow, my color looks terrible on that camera. Looks like I got a radiation burn, I think. Why? And you look great.
Hello.
You look great, Seb. Hey everybody, thank you so much for joining us. This is our second of an infinite number of Q&A lives. We'll do this once a quarter. The premise of this get together is that we get lots of cool questions throughout the year submitted to support, maybe introduced during a consultation session. Maybe it's in the community. We get these great questions, we give these great answers, and the only people who benefit from those answers is the person who asked. And doesn't it make sense that if we have some really good stuff that we share it with folks, to everybody who might benefit from it? So that's what brings us to the Q&A live session, because we are live. This is not pre-recorded. Seb Meunier, thank you very much again for joining us. Can you tell everybody where you are right now? I'm curious myself.
I am at the moment in Moab, Utah, and more specifically in the garage, so sorry for the bikes behind.
That's so we can make a quick getaway once this is over.
Yes.
Very jealous, but good to have you here, Seb. So if for those of you who have paid any attention to the posting for this event, you've seen the agenda. We've got a lot of really cool new content for you. Most of the speaking will be done by Seb. I'm just going to introduce this thing, but here's what'll happen. We'll have a set of topics. I will turn it over to Seb to do a deep dive into those topics. You expect lots of demonstrations and expect to participate a little bit as well. Keep your phones handy. And after we conclude a topic, I will rejoin the conversation, monitoring that questions panel. So that's your big participation responsibility. If you have a question at any time, put in the questions panel of the GoToWebinar toolbar. I'll keep track of that stuff, and I will engage with Seb on those questions interactively as soon as he's done covering the topic. Depending on how much time we have left, let's also have a discussion. You can ask anything you want, so feel free to ask other stuff on your mind, and we'll address those as well. So if I look at the agenda, Seb, it seems like the first topic is all about using the Headless CMS, which we all use and love. I'm sure that all of you are using the Headless CMS already. I don't have to tell you to do that. But one question we received, I'm not sure how long ago it was, Seb, was about how you can search it. In other words, you present some kind of form, some text field where people can type something in, and Intuiface is searching the Headless CMS for that thing. Even more interesting would be not just searching it, but even doing an autocomplete based on what it is finding in the Headless CMS. So there's kind of two sides to that. They're searching and then autocomplete, which is really interesting. And if people can do it, they might want to do it a lot. So Seb, that's the first topic for you. I'm going to give you control of the screen.
Thank you.
Let me make you presenter. And there you go.
All right. Come on, go to webinar. You should have my screen here. Is that okay, Geoff?
We see the quarterly Q&A live logo,
All
and now
right.
we see search for HEMA. We're perfect. Thank you.
All right, so let's start with the search. We've had this question for a while, and not only with Headless CMS, to be honest. All the things I'm going to say here apply to Headless CMS, but they also apply to Excel if you're still using an Excel file as your main data source in an Intuiface experience. We're going to have a look at two ways of doing search, a basic one and a more advanced one. That's the basic one. So one text field, one text input. Let's say I searched for maps. I get the items where we have the maps in the title. I'm actually searching here in this particular field. So the base I'm using here is the base from our Intuiface experience, and I'm searching among the usages. Actually, let me show you the base just for a second so we know exactly what I'm talking about. This collection here, that's our list of usages. I have 94 items at the moment. Every single usage has a name, and that's the column I'm searching in. Now you might see that some usages have the same name, but they belong to a different vertical. And that's fine. You can use a kiosk in real estate, you can use a kiosk in retail. Probably the summary, maybe the images would be different. That's where you would do two searches. One first filter, more filter than a search on a particular vertical, and then a second one, which would be really a search. So back to the experience, how does this work? In this case here, what I did is when you type in on the text input, while you type in the characters individually, nothing happens. That's the simple one. The only thing is when I hit the enter key or when I press the search button, then it does call the action to search, aka filter, on this particular field. So let me go back in edit mode because I want to show you a very simple tricks that I like to use when I build this kind of UI, which just makes life easier. So the first thing is when you have such a text input, usually there is a virtual keyboard that pops up. And when you actually do the search, you want both to do the search and to hide that keyboard to get out of the focus mode. I like personally to have this search button as an additional way to express, for the user to express himself that, yeah, I've typed my search criteria, I actually want to search. So usually on the search button, this is where I will add my filter action. I will probably as well show a delete or clear button. That's the little cross which I had here. And I'm also exiting the editing mode, which will hide the virtual keyboard. Now on the filter, that's kind of simple, and I'm sure most of you have done that before, at least with Excel. You select on which property, which column, which field of your base. Actually, at the moment, I'm searching in the name. I'm using contains case insensitive, so you don't have to worry about uppercase and lowercase. And then the value is bound to the text of that text input. So that's what the search button does. Now, if I look at the text input, there's only one single trigger. When the enter key is pressed, do as if the user has tapped on the search button. So you don't have to copy and paste these 3 actions 2 times. You can just say, whenever anybody hits the enter key, I just want to do the exact same thing as if they had clicked on that search button. Sounds stupid, but then when you need to do a modification on your filter or add something else, you do it once, not twice. So it avoids some potential errors in the future. Before you ask, can you filter in or search into multiple columns? Yes and no. As I said, if you want to, if I go back to play mode here, and I'm searching for, let's say, kiosk. You can see that I have a multimedia kiosk for real estate, and I have a multimedia kiosk for trade show. So again, I could have another field or maybe some buttons to filter on that vertical or category first to make sure that I'm getting the right kiosk for the right vertical. That would be an and. So if a category vertical contains real estate and the name contains kiosk, then show me the results. What you cannot do as of today is to do an or. I want every single item where either the vertical or the name contains my search criteria kiosk. That you cannot do. If you want to do that, the only way I could think of is to add a third field in your base, which would be the concatenation of the columns you want to search into. In Excel, you could use a formula to do that. In the Headless CMS, if you have imported your CSV, you could use a formula to generate your CSV and then import your CSV. So you have a third column with real estate, a kind of separator like semicolon, then multimedia kiosk, and that's the column on which you would apply your filter to actually do the search. I hope that makes sense. Let me move on to the advanced filter. I'm using the exact same base. Now the difference is when I start typing a character, so again, I'm going to search for kiosk, K-I-O, I get this autocomplete list of suggestions. Again, we have these multimedia kiosk for real estate or for trade show. The name is the same, but when I click on that, I get all the items here where the name is equal to multimedia kiosk. I could still use contains, but since we have this autocompletion, we could use the equal to if you want to be a bit more specific or precise. So how does that work? Where does this list here comes from, and why when I apply a filter on that list, nothing moves on the right-hand side? Back to the Headless CMS base, one way of doing it, it's not the only one, but it's probably the cleanest one, is to have a second collection, which we have called here the usages for filtering, which will also have 94 items, but probably way less columns, no images, no videos, no kind of media. just these properties that we want to use to actually search. And that's the kind of the third column I was talking about. If you want to have some tags or keywords that would help the search engine to be a bit more efficient than just searching in the name of the usage. So back to edit mode. Let me show you what's under the hood. So we're going to go to our second search with Edge CMS. And here we will have our list of usages here on the right. And then here, hidden in a group, I'm using a group as a clipping mask. I have a second collection, which is using these usages for filtering second data source. You know, the second one that I just showed you in the Headless CMS. In Excel, that will be an additional sheet in your Excel file with these simplified fields but corresponding to the same items of your full column. So now regarding the triggers and actions, what happens is on the text input, each time the text is updated, so I'm not waiting for hitting a search button or for hitting the enter key. Each time the text is updated, if the text is not empty, then I'm adding a filter on these usages for filtering. That can be a lot of filters, but that's not a problem. It definitely works. Based on that, we have this second list, which is narrowed down to what corresponds to that search criteria. And then I also do a check on the toggle button. The job of this button is just to basically show the list, move it outside of the clipping mask, sorry. So it gets visible here. That's the first step, showing the auto completion or the suggestions from that second list. Then once you have that second list, we do have a button here, which job is to do what we did in the previous scene. We're doing a search. So I reuse the same search button. I just set the text to my text input to my suggestion. So I'm reusing the input here, maps, remote control shop window. I'm setting this value into the text input. And then I'm simulating a tap on my search button to do exactly what I was doing earlier, filtering the real usages list, the one which is displayed here on the right, using the text in the text input as the search criteria, showing the clear button and exiting the text input mode. That's two ways, simple one, more advanced ones, of how to do some search with or without auto completion using the Headless CMS. You know that these filtering actions are exactly the same than the ones we have with Excel. So all I'm saying here, again, can work with Excel. If you still have a project running on Excel, that's completely fine. And I hope that answers the questions we had on that topic. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Geoff, see if we had some live questions about that.
For the most part, I think people are somewhat shy. We did get one question, but it's on a different topic. We'll return to that later.
Okay.
But so folks, if you have any questions, please do that questions panel and we'll address it promptly. So I wanted to just revisit to be sure. And so the method you're using at the end of the day is not unique to the Headless CMS. Could have been Excel, it could have been Airtable. It's just adapting to.
Yes and no. The nice thing about Excel and the Headless CMS is that they share the exact same actions. This add filter with name, criteria, value, these are exactly the same actions between Excel and Headless CMS. If you use a third-party data source like Airtable or WordPress or whatever, you don't have these add filter actions. You will have whatever this third-party solution is providing within its API. Airtable, that's the filter by formula criteria that you can add to a request. If you use WordPress, that would be something else. So it would be a bit different. Some APIs maybe will not enable you to do some search or some filtering. So that's the difference between Excel and HTMS, which are handled 100% by Intuiface, and the third-party API, which will rely on the API.
So conceptually, it could apply to anything. It's just that Excel and Headless CMS share the same filter names. You'd have to find the custom API filter name for the other stuff.
Right.
Okay. And you're using text here. I guess it could be numbers as well. I mean, it's numbers text as far as this is concerned.
That's, yeah, any kind of a value or criteria that you want to use. It doesn't have to be something that you display, right? If we go back to our base here, we have some search keywords. So if I had used this search keyword column and I was searching for RFID, this lift and learn would pop up. While
Well,
you
what's
don't see any
interesting,
RFID in the name or in the vertical.
in a way, those are tags. You're creating a tags column.
Yeah, that's correct.
Which is a very cool idea. I mean, I think there's a general takeaway from this, which is this is what makes the real advanced users of Intuiface so good, is the ability to think out of the box. I mean, what you did to create the autocomplete using a second data feed from a second, I mean, that's pretty creative stuff, you know. But it's a good lesson, I think, for the audience, for people that are still getting to know the product, about the flexibility you have if you think out of the box a little bit, how you can repurpose things, because that's really creative.
And maybe I can add on one little thing is, why do I need a second feed? Instead of just using the text is updated, and each time I start typing a character, I would refresh the list on the right-hand side. Well, first of all, you could do that, but your main user interface, your main UI would blink quite a lot if you were filtering every single character to refresh this list, which this one is pretty simple, but the media may be bigger. You may have only media files. So that would be kind of annoying for the end user. And because the data template here is 1, 2, 3 text and 1 image, while here we have, usually we would have just one text. I just added the second one to explain the confusion of the multiple times having the same names. But usually that would be just one text. So it's much lighter and faster to refresh, and it's less annoying to see a list of text being refreshed, because that's the purpose of auto-completion.
That's a very good general tip, which is to be sensitive to refresh for any audience-facing content. Even something like retail point of sale, I guess it doesn't matter, but if you steal focus, if you refresh before the audience is ready, that's one reason why with the Headless CMS, we're very careful about the refresh control. We don't just want to do it whenever we want, because it could force a visual refresh at a bad time. And you want to be able to control when that refresh happens. It shouldn't be every minute, because they might be in the middle of some kind of some use case, and you steal that the visual from them. It's not the right time. So you need to really think about, where do I put in that refresh? When do I refresh? How often do I do it? This is another example. Don't keep blinking the long list on the right. Wait until they've made a choice on the left, and then you can refresh on the right. So it's very smart, I think, general guidance. Let's see.
So I see a question from Ahmed about, you mentioned something about using JavaScript in this example. Did I? Because I didn't use any JavaScript here.
No, that's
Nope.
Ahmed is wishing, because that's obviously an interesting topic for him. But no.
Nope, there's no code written on this one. The only thing I'm doing is applying a filter on the first list. And then when I click on one of these buttons, I'm applying a filter on that actual second list. Which
maybe when you talked about Airtable or WordPress, maybe there was some confusion
maybe
there.
Yeah, but even with Airtable, you could do that with the API Explorer. You shouldn't need to use any JavaScript, except maybe to build that formula that you pass as the filter by formula parameter, but that's super Airtable specific. On WordPress, that would be much easier probably, or Knack, I think it's pretty good also with filters. But on the Headless CMS or Excel, no code required.
Tell you what, let's, in lieu of looking at the clock, let's move on to the second item, Alex. I did see your question, but we'll come back to that. So let's talk about the second topic. This is about experience-to-experience communication, which is interesting in part because I think a lot of Intuiface users don't even know that that's possible, that one experience can send information to, can indicate that an event has occurred, sending that information to another experience. And in fact, there's multiple options. It's not just one way to do that. And it also can vary a little bit from platform to platform, what one is capable of. So that's the next topic, experience-to-experience communication. I will shut up. Go ahead, Seb.
Thank you, Geoff. So I'm going to start with the boring part. but which I believe is underrated and underused, and that's the Help Center article. We have this article which we published not that long ago, like 8 months ago, about how do you send messages between running Intuiface experiences, 2 or more. We have multiple mechanisms, and the 2 main ones are the local network triggers and the web triggers. So this diagram kind of explain when can you use which one. As of today, and this is an as of today article, right? Which is not, I'm going to mention Player Next Gen at some point. So as of today, the local network triggers can only be received on the Windows machine. So the receiver has to be running a player for Windows. And as you can guess, they require to be sent on the local network. What perfect scenario? Executive briefing center, headquarters showroom, where you have a huge video wall, maybe not touch, and you have a facilitator, a guide, somebody who's guiding the audience through the tour with a tablet, a phone, whatever, something in his hands. Or even you have a smaller kiosks in front of that wall that will send some commands to the wall. All the devices are in control. They are on the same local network. They can use the local network triggers. These have to be received by a Windows machine, which usually would be the one used on a large video wall, but they can be sent from any of the 7 platforms that we support today. The second option is the web trigger through the web trigger API. That's much easier to explain. You can send it from wherever you want. You can receive it wherever you want. Downside, it has to go through the cloud. So is it slower than the local network? Technically, probably. Will you notice the difference? If you have a reasonable connection, probably not. So it is super fast, and we're going to do a live demo of that in just a minute. So that's the first thing, local network triggers, web triggers, which platform can use which, and we have this table kind of summarizing all of that. Now, another important thing is which platforms can send that message. And again, this is an as of today, all the officially released platforms that we have with our player for Windows and player for other platforms. Most of you here are starting to be familiar with our player Next Gen, which is still in the managed rollout phase, which is why it's not yet in this article. The player Next Gen can send web triggers, because in the end, this is done through the API Explorer, and I'm going to show you that. It could probably send some local network triggers, but it defeats the purpose, because if you are running on the web, you maybe are on your mobile phone, like a visitor in a museum, and there's very little chance that visitor is on the local network. He's connected to the local Wi-Fi of the museum. It's probably on his 4G or 5G plan. So these web triggers, that's the ones that you are actually going to use in just a second. And the player Next Gen, I know, yeah, I think Paolo is here, so he's going to like this. The web triggers are going to be available also on player Next Gen to receive triggers very, very soon. We are talking a few weeks. So that's something which is pretty new compared to what we were doing before. We've had web triggers for years. We had local network triggers for years. But before player Next Gen, you had to build the UI that would go on the mobile, on the tablet, using any HTML website builder, and to use some JavaScript. Nowadays, you can use player Next Gen to build an experience for the mobile phone. So again, this article summarizes what's available. Just search for messages between experiences. You will find it on the Help Center. Now let's switch to the demo. So here's a QR code. Please grab your phones. I'm going to do it at the same time, actually. And you can start scanning the code. Let me get that here, camera. All right. So what you're going to see on your phone right now is not a website. It's not something custom written in HTML or JavaScript CSS. So for those who didn't scan it, that's what you see. It's an experience built in Composer in just a few minutes. There is no code at all. The URL behind this bit.ly, which I use, so it's a bit simpler to scan and to type in, is redirecting to an experience on the web running on Player Next-Gen on your phone at the moment. This experience is the one using the Web Triggers API. And thank you guys, that's very nice, although I should vote for Geoff myself, because let's be honest here.
I just want you to know that 4 of those
Geoff.
8 are mine. 4 of those 8 are mine.
Yeah, that's a demo. I didn't robustify anything, making sure that you can vote only once, all that kind of stuff. It's a demo explaining the concepts and the architecture. Right. So again, let's go back to the edit mode in Composer and see how this works. So on this side, the receiver side, communicate between experiences, we have here a web triggers interface asset with basically 2 conditional triggers. When I receive a vote message and parameter 1 is Geoff, add 1 to the counter for Geoff. When I receive a vote for Seb, add 1 for the counter of Seb. Can't be simpler. That's the receiving side. As of today, this could run on Player for Windows or Player for any other platforms, not next-gen, with our regular, soon to be called legacy player. That's how I like to call this one. Now, on the sending side, that's the remote. So it's just a portrait experience. 2 scenes, please vote, thank you, super simple. And then we have these 2 buttons, which are calling an action on this send message interface asset. Now, what is this? This is using our Web Triggers API. And before I go into that, maybe I could show you here, how does this work? So the Web Triggers API documentation, that would be actually the right way of building the things from the receiver to the API to the sender. Through this managed part of the console, you have access to the Intuiface API guide. Before you get there, you might want to create a credential key if you don't have one yet. Copy that credential key and use it here to authorize your messages. Then you decide the kind of message and parameter you want to send. These should match what you're expecting on the receiver side on your conditional triggers. So I'm going to go here and play that again. And by the way, these are counters, so everything is reset to 0 because I just restarted the experience, right? Now, from the API guide, if I do an execute here, we should see a 1 sent to Geoff. That's the request here that I just copy and paste into my API Explorer. I want to send a message. That's my API key, which I'm going to delete after this webinar, so don't even try. That's the message I'm sending, and that's an example of a parameter 1. Once you have imported that into your sender experience, you get this IA, and then from the button, you can say, I want to send a message to the Web Triggers API. That's my credential key. I want to send vote. I want to send vote for Geoff on the Geoff button, and I want to send vote for Seb on the Seb button. Again, I don't think we can go any simpler than that to build a remote control that we can have any amount of users use from their mobile phone through a GoToMeeting, Zoom, Skype, whatever, to send some inputs to a presenter, to a main experience that could work in a museum, could work in an EBC, in a briefing center, any kind of scenario where you want the audience to be active and to interact with your screen without touching it. That's one example. And again, without requiring any more HTML, JavaScript, CSS custom made as we were promoting before, thanks to the Player Next-Gen. So I haven't seen the questions yet, but before you ask, can you do that yourself? If you want, if you have some projects which would involve using the Player Next-Gen in such a way, please contact us. We are providing access to Next-Gen to more and more people. And we'd be happy to help you build that scenario using Next-Gen. Geoff, turning over to you.
Thank you very much. There was one question, and then I have a couple things for you. The question is from a very excited Paulo, which is, maybe I should restate it. Do you have to worry about queuing? I mean, let's say there's lots of incoming messages. Is there a limit? Is there a concern? Or no, the infrastructure will take care of it. Doesn't matter what, how would you respond to that?
I've never seen a limit, and that would be a good problem to solve, I guess. All our web triggers are hosted on the AWS infrastructure. So on the server side, I'm pretty confident we can handle a lot of requests. On the interface side, all the triggers are arriving one by one. So can you overload the player in the way it processes these triggers? Try. That's my that's the best answer I can give. I've never seen the issue myself.
Nothing is known as a bottleneck in this scenario.
No.
Okay.
But I've never put a QR code on a live channel during a Super Bowl, so that would be a good test.
That'd be a great problem and a good thing. You did just touch on very briefly about letting people re-vote. Let me point out, by the way, you just saw PLN running on the web. I mean, that's pretty cool, right? Because a year ago, if we had this discussion, because web triggers have existed for, I don't know, 3 years, 4 years, been a while. This discussion would have talked about you building a web page, right? Using your own HTML, and with PLN, you no longer have to do that. This took Seb, 4 minutes to build a web page, which is pretty simple web page, but it's pretty cool. You did just touch on briefly this preventing people from re-voting. So is that an Intuiface thing? Is that a web thing? I mean, just at a high level, how would you handle that?
No, that would probably be a way in the player next gen to make sure that once you have voted, you don't allow to revote. You put a kind of a lock in the experience to prevent that from happening. Someday in the future, I'm assuming you will be able to play a bit more with cookies. So even if you close the tab and reopen the tab, but on the same phone, in the same browser, we will know that you're trying to cheat. I'm not sure how I would do that today, the cookie stuff. But at the experience level, preventing you to do a back or to do a refresh, or maybe just within the vote, you could send some, I don't like to say personal ID because that's against GDPR, but something that sort of anonymously identifies the device that is sending that request. And then on the receiver side, you could store that list and say, I already know you, I'm not counting your vote anymore. Lots of possibilities depending on the use case and how much you need to prevent that from happening.
There are scenarios for handling it. I mean, somebody is obviously doing it now because the vote we currently see is clearly wrong. So
yeah.
Let me just touch on one small other issue, not an issue, just something you said. I'm not sure everybody is actually familiar. So API key. So you mentioned the API key and that you're going to change your API key. Can you let folks know just what is that and how do they get their key?
Sure. Let me go back here. So when you go on your account, you can go to My Credential Keys. And I will probably not do that on this account because that's mine. Let me grab this one. So when you're in this page, you can create any amount of keys that you want. When you create a key, you need to check web triggers. That's what you want to use. And actually, to be specific, you want to use the web trigger API. In my case, the key I've been using here in this demo and the one you may have seen in your experience is set to expire tonight. So that key will be dead and you won't be able to do anything on my account after that. That's for the purpose of the demo. But that's how you create that. When you do a create and you put a name, demo key, live QA, create, that's the key that you get. So you
and the key,
copy that.
And it does two things. First of all, it's account specific. So you cannot, the communication, like web triggers, will be for this account only. You couldn't have that communication for somebody else's account. That's the first reason we have the keys. It's account specific. And the second is to prevent other people from pinging your own account's experiences. If they don't have the key, they won't be able to send messages or do stuff like that. So it's to ensure that you have the right to do it and it's limited to your account, that sort of thing, right? So
yeah, and you're right to mention that. If we go back to our article and let me refresh that. Yeah, of course I changed that. On the article, on the diagram, that's the API key of the receiver. So here on the receiver side, I'm logged in as Meunier at Intuiface.com. If somebody wants to send a web trigger to a player running under Meunier at Intuiface.com, you need to use one of my credential keys. You could use this remote control from anywhere, even from the web, where you don't have an account, you don't have a license, and still it works. You could use it on your player for Windows using your account, doesn't matter, provided that the web trigger call, which is the key you call here, this one here, this one is belonging to the account running the receiver experience. So that message has the right to reach the receiver.
Thank
That's
you.
good
Yeah,
clarification.
it's an important point. It's critical. Now you know where to find it, why we have it, what you can do with it. So let's move on, Seb. The next topic, it feels kind of similar vein a little bit. We just talked about experience to experience communication. Now let's talk about scene to scene communication.
Yeah.
Another topic I'm not sure everybody even knows you can do it. You can pass information from one scene to another. The question is, how would you do that? And so, Seb, why don't you take it away on that topic?
Sure. And first of all, before diving into that, why are we talking about this today? Because you've been able to do that, again, for years in Composer. That is because we retired a feature that we had in Composer, enabling you to call an action on a different scene than the one you are currently on. Why did we do that? Because it had some issues on some of the platforms that we are supporting, because it could cause some performance issues, because you had to have, I'm simplifying here, but two scenes loaded at the same time, so that scene A can send an action on an object on scene B, and that would cause performance issues. So we decided to retire that function and to keep the two other ones that we already had, which were maybe, I don't want to say more complex, but maybe less obvious, which is why I want to talk about them today. Again, we do have this article in the Help Center, pass information between scenes with the two methods. We removed the third one. And so we're going to have a look at each of them. So using experience layers and using an interface asset. So demo number one, using an experience layer. So you can see this thing here at the bottom, which is an XP layer. And as before, I will go back to edit mode to show you exactly how it works. So let's say you want, at the beginning of an experience, hey, please give me your name. And you want to reuse that name all across the rest of the experience. Say, hey, John, welcome. So typing Geoff here, I would basically set the text in this XP layer, and then I can go to another scene. The name remains the same. Super simple. You're just setting a property of an asset which doesn't belong to the scene, but belongs to the experience layer. And an experience layer can be shared across multiple scenes. That's how you can pass information from one scene to any amount of additional scenes. Let's have a look at this first in edit mode, and then we'll jump to the interface asset example. All right, so in here, we have our demo group, we have a text. Same as for the search, right? The enter key only simulates a tap on the next, and that's the next button which actually does the job. And it's basically just a set text. So I'm setting a text on this enter name goes here, which is in my XP layer. And I'm binding this on my text input, the one which I do have in my scene at the moment. And I'm going to the next scene. That's about it. The converter, I think, is just to add hello before the name and exclamation mark after the name. That's it. So this scene here, this layer here is hidden. I'm showing it, I believe, when I click on that button, just on the demo. But even if the scene doesn't show the experience layer, you can call an action on these objects here. So this is the text which will contain the information you want to pass across multiple scenes. As you can see, that's my scene, that's my XP layer. XP layer does not belong to the scene. So this method works great when you have one field, maybe two. that you need to carry on, and especially when this is or requires to be a visual element. Maybe you want to select a name, you want to select an image, something that you need to get some persistence. Does that work? Between one scene and the future in the experience, using the XP layer to store and display that value is a good way to do that. Let's go on to the second scenario. So going back in play mode, we did demo 1. Let's have a look at demo 2. In this one, I have a data list, and let's say that's a wayfinding scenario. You're looking for a shop on the store, and for whatever reason, you don't have the map on the same scene than this list. Don't ask me why, that's just an example. So here in Excel, I have the name of the shop, I have its X coordinate, its Y coordinates. I need these two values to, in the next scene, I added the timer here. Okay, here is the object I want to pinpoint. If I go back and I select another one in my demo 2, Quaxo, 1, 2, 3, that was just to give me time to talk. The pin now moves to this particular location. So the X and Y, you don't want to display them, you want to use them within an action, a move to action in this case. When you need to do such a thing, and that could be just saving an ID to apply a filter or a search criteria in next scene, or in this case here, we are actually, where is that being demo group 2? We are saving just the X and Y coordinates. So how do we do that? First of all, we have among our interface assets, 2 global variables. So when you do an add here, if you search for variable, you get this global variable. See this as a shoebox in which you can put an object, put a value. We want to store 2 values, X and Y. We need 2 boxes, 2 variables, the X position and the Y position, which are empty by default. On my list here, when I click on my object, what I'm doing is I am setting the value on this X position using the value coming from my Excel file or my HCMS base. It's an HCMS base here. I'm doing the same on the Y. Set value on the second box, the Y position. I'm storing and saving that Y position. And then I'm going to the next scene. When I enter that scene, this is where I can use the value stored in these variables or not. You could have a conditional trigger. If the value is empty, do nothing. Or if the value is not empty, then do what you have to do. In this case, I used a 3-second timer. Again, that was just to give me time to talk. And I'm moving that red pinpoint to the X and Y, which I have stored and saved in my 2 variables, X position and Y using the Y position. So when can this be used and why use this global variable rather than the experience layer? First of all, it's a personal choice because you could do exactly the same things with the 2 methods. My way of thinking and working is that if you don't need to display visually an information, it shouldn't be stored in an asset as a simple text. That's where the global variable is useful. It's more of a developer approach probably, but anything that you need to like a post-it that you want to keep in your mind, I need to remember that later on. Okay, I'm putting this info somewhere, and I know I can go back to this somewhere and get that information and use it when I need that. That's the value of the interface assets, such as the X position, the Y position, the global variables, because an interface asset, again, belongs to the whole experience and is accessible at all time in all the scenes of your experience. I think that covers the 2 aspects, using the XP layer, experience layer, when you want something visual, using a variable when you want something a bit more logical to be used in parameters of actions, for example.
No questions, just I want to point something out, and I have one question. So what's interesting about the use of the experience layer is it's not really scene to scene. It's just always there. And you can choose whether or not to display the experience layer. In fact, you can toggle that on and off for given scenes. Not just hide it, but you can literally just exclude it from a scene. But it's just always there. It's the home button, the company logo, it's just always there. So it's not really passing so much as it's always accessible. I had one, maybe it's a quick question. For the global variable, you had a 3-second delay, I understand. Can it be a 0-second delay? Or, I mean, do you need something to give the scene a millisecond to load? I mean, do you need to be sensitive to that with global variables?
So first of all, you can use a 0.1 second timer. That's what I usually use. And then in this particular case, just don't animate the move to. So if we do that, we're going to actually test that live. If we go back to our demo here, I'm looking at the clock and I see we do have a question. Let me select the My Burger. Right, the pinpoint is already there. It's already displayed over the My Burger shop. So it's now
probably
instant,
okay.
as in 0.1 instant a second, which is more than enough.
The question
instead of
go ahead, sorry.
Just to finish on that, instead of using the timer, you could use scene has been entered. I just use here a timer again to let me time to talk. The one important thing, if you decide to do that, to use this scene triggers more than the timer trigger, it's important to understand the difference between scene is being entered and scene has been entered. They look pretty similar, but they are different. If you had an action to do when entering this scene on something which is not visual, like when I enter this scene, I want to filter my Excel file with the information that has been selected before. You can use the is being entered because it won't have any impact. If you want to do a move to on a visual object in the scene, you need to make sure that the visual element has been loaded, else the element doesn't exist, and you might try to call an action on an element which doesn't exist. You might lose the action. Yeah. I'm using might because it's a bit tricky to know when exactly things are getting loaded. If you use the has been entered, the elements have been loaded. That's a given. So if you want a 0 delay, as soon as they are loaded, do that. That's the trigger that you could decide to use.
The question is a little related to something you had said a moment ago, which is what if you want to change a visual property of something, like conditionally hiding or showing an asset in the next scene? So you're not passing a value, you're passing a property value. And it probably varies depending on the property, but like maybe for you're doing opacity or something. But go ahead, Seb.
So I see the question here is about a show or hide an item. And that's where my answers are again going to be it depends on how many of these items you have and what is exactly the whole logic, the big picture of what you're trying to do. But let's say you had just one image, right, in this corner, and you want sometimes this image to be visible, sometimes not. The way I would do that would be to add a variable with a show image. In this show image, I will put a true by default, maybe, or false. And then on the image itself, I would bind this value to the variable. Then on the previous scene, where today I'm setting the X and Y, I would set the value for this show image to either true or false, depending on your criteria. I don't know, if this is a jewelry store, yes. If it's not, if it's a food store, no. Whatever condition you have. So changing this variable value between true and false, and then for such a thing, you don't really need an action because you don't have any animations. You can just use the binding and say this image will be visible or not depending on that variable. By the way, we could have done,
those values can be passed. It could be any value.
We could have done the same thing for this pinpoint and just bind the X and Y to the selected X and Y. But then if you do that, you will not have an action. And for the demo, I wanted to have an action with an animation to show you that the thing is moving when I decided I wanted to move. Maria, I hope that answers your question. And then if you have 20 elements and 20 true and false values, then we need to talk a bit more because there might be other ways using a bit more logic behind the scenes.
Seb, we wrap up with a smaller topic, but of great interest to many of our customers, particularly agencies and integrators. You're managing multiple clients. You're using secondary accounts or thinking about using secondary accounts. There's a little bit of confusion about, for the primary account, how do I handle analytics data or deployment to certain players or that sort of thing. So let's talk about secondary accounts a little bit.
Yes. So first of all, again, I know can be boring, too long to read, but we have a great article about that. Work with secondary accounts. This will tell you everything you need to know on what is a secondary account, what exactly you can do with it, what maybe you cannot do with it at this moment. But just a couple of things that I wanted to show live. And that's after I saw one of our customers missing something on the UI. So as Geoff mentioned, this applies mainly for agencies and integrators who have multiple end customers. And you have your agency account as your primary account. So in that case, I'm logged in as sales-demo. That's my primary account. I will say PA and SA. PA for primary account, SA for secondary account. So on my PA, I have access to all my experiences. As an agency, I create some XPs for restaurant, for a sales presentation, for a trade show, different customers, different projects, but I'm the PA, so I have the right to see all of them. Now, I have several customers. One of them is the sales demo at Chicago, our Chicago office. And these guys, they should only see these two projects. That's the only ones I shared with them because that's the projects I made for them. Well, this combo box here, a drop-down menu, maybe you haven't seen that. So from the My Experiences panel, when you're logged in as the PA, you can see both your PA experiences and then your SA experiences. And this list will be longer if you have more than one SA, obviously. That's for the My Experiences side. Now, the same applies to the players. So as the PA, you can see your PA players. And actually on this account, we only have players here. These two are online, these are offline. And if you had loaned a license to one of your SAs and you wanted to do a deploy on behalf of your customer, you don't have to know their credentials. You don't have to log in as them because you're the PA. So you can just say, okay, I want to see my players on my secondary account for Chicago. Let's imagine you had a player here. You could select that player and say, I want to deploy one of the two experiences they have access to. So these drop-downs are pretty convenient and pretty easy to use to manage the experiences and the players of your secondary accounts. The additional thing I want to show you is when you go into My Account here, you do have My Secondary Accounts. And if you want to, I don't know, double check or make sure that this particular Chicago SA cannot see my French experiences, you can use this access button here. So when you do that, you're actually surrogating the rights to log in as your SA, still without knowing their credentials, because you're the PA, so you have the right to do that. That's among your license. So if you give your customer a login password, you tell them, change your passwords, that's your account, completely fine. You can still access it as the PA to help them manage their account. In here, you will only see the two experiences that have been shared with them and the players which they have. Again, on this particular account, I don't have any. If you do a logout, then you will be able to log in again as your SA, going back to this here. So this accessing the SA from here with the access button is good because you're sure about what they see. But if you have a lot of SAs and going log out, log in, log out, log in can be a bit tedious, which is why going here and using this dropdown is much more convenient from a management standpoint. Maybe one last thing, Geoff mentioned something about analytics. You could also see here all the analytics data points which has been logged by your essay and by each of your essays, secondary accounts. And when you go in here, you can also decide to include the secondary data points as well. So as the PA, you can get all the data for all your accounts, PA and essay, in one spot. If you do want to get the data points only for one particular essay, then yes, you need to use the My Secondary Accounts, access, log in as the essay, go to the same page, download the points. You will see only the data points of this particular essay. I think that covers it. Again, the article Work with Secondary Accounts kind of summarizes all that. Oh, and even probably go into more details about licensing. And we're getting far from composers, where that's where I stop talking usually.
Seb, remind me, if I'm building a chart in analytics, the primary account only sees primary account data points?
No.
Okay, good.
Let me show you that. So if you go into your dashboards and you try to create a chart, create a new chart, in here you will see all Intuiface accounts, or you can select only the data points from the PA or only the data points from one or multiple essays. So you have the list available here in the chart editor.
I'm pretty sure that field is conditional. If you don't have a secondary account, you don't see that field at all. I think it's conditional.
Probably.
So if some of you are saying, I don't see that, that's because you don't have a secondary account yet.
Yep.
Okay, good. I think that's pretty straightforward. We didn't have any other questions, but secondary accounts are super powerful because it enables you to segregate one client from another, manage them independently, control your license distribution, control what experiences they have access to, separate their data from one another. I mean, it's really, really helpful. You could use it, I guess, for just internal projects. I mean, you could, but technically they are different Intuiface accounts. It might be more trouble than it's worth, but when it's literally different accounts, it's very helpful. I'm going to open up the floor to additional questions. Seb, we're almost at the hour. We actually scheduled this for 45 minutes. I don't know why we did, because we always go over.
We had long topics today.
We did have long topics. I want to revisit just one question. So Alex has been with us, is very interested in the Headless CMS. He's very interested in the notion, at the end of the day, if I can summarize his questions, it's filtering on the Headless CMS side, okay? You're doing all the filtering on the experience side, sort of in real time. Is there a way to sort in the Headless CMS, to create views in the Headless CMS, to return distinct collections, all of which I think are no, and no, at least not yet, but I wanted you to just quickly address that.
Well, I think the answer you provided in the chat is the right one. Short answer is no and no, but both are in the roadmap.
Yep.
And I like you, I don't have any timeline on that. At the moment, we focused really on providing the same level of power of expression at the composer level than what we had with Excel, the same level of conveniency, if I may say, to use these filters on the composer side. But yeah, I love the views in Airtable, and I can't wait for the day we'll have something similar in HCMS as well.
Yep. It'll be interesting. Remember, I'm not sure if this is particularly germane, but just remember that with the Headless CMS, there's always a local copy of the base that's synchronized with the cloud. So some of what we're discussing ultimately would be happening on the device, which is, there's an advantage and a disadvantage in terms of delivery of that capability, but we'll see. But having it local has distinct advantages in general, so that's a good thing to have. There was just one other question, Seb. It was just an out of the ballpark, completely random, but perfectly valid question, which again, if I can summarize, was about capabilities you'll see on the web, like a 360-degree product spin, where it looks like a set of images, but you can quickly, like shuffling a deck of cards, and you can work your way through the deck of cards. But I think more broadly, it's about cool web animation stuff or things like that. So are there ways to do that sort of category of stuff in Intuiface? I think the answer is, if you can do it on the web, do it in the web browser, but then you have a different, what do you do with the Headless CMS, etc. So it gets a little complicated.
Yeah, so the way I see that, I see the question is everything about 360-degree content. And that's a question that we've been we've had several times over the last month or years. And as of today, our answer has been there are tools on the web to enable to load that content and manipulate that content. So use the same kind of tools within either the web browser or the HTML frame if you can, whether you're using something online or on a local server, if you're running on a Windows machine, these kind of things. We definitely want to make this easier and simpler and eventually off the shelf in Composer. We're not there yet. And I don't know what's the roadmap about that. We did a while ago an example of like you have 36 images, different angles, and you just shuffle through these images using one of our collections to simulate these kind of components on the web. You can do it. Result is not exceptional, to be honest. So I'd rather go with a good web tool and embed that tool within Composer. Paolo has been doing that for years with Matterports, or even building some Unity apps using the transparent background on Windows. That's the kind of the super advanced level of the 3D integration with Intuiface. And if you just type 360 in our user community or virtual environments in the user community, you will probably see some of these projects, most of them being made by Paolo. So how to load a 360 view of a room, like a house scan. I would probably use a web-based platform. How to load an object that you want to turn around, which is the other perspective. Maybe you can generate a 3D model and use our 3D model asset. That would be yet another option. I hope that answers the question. It's a broad topic. It's a really broad topic, and I don't know why this thing keeps getting out of focus.
Yeah, I mean, one of the beauty of our ability to work with web browsers or just embed things in an iframe is you can introduce, web content. The challenge, of course, then is it is a sandbox, though. It cannot see your headless CMS, for example, right? It's on the web, and so it's completely independent. I think technically, could you send web triggers to the web browser asset or from the web browser asset? I guess maybe you could do that. If the web page is sending the web triggers and you load in the web browser asset, I guess you can send web triggers. So maybe there's some fancy stuff you can do, but it is a bit of a sandbox.
I do know that Paolo has created some communication between Unity and Intuiface using either web triggers or local network triggers. I don't remember exactly, but it is documented publicly on our community, so you can check that out.
That's pretty creative. Again, working around. It's back to that original example with searching the headless CMS and that secondary group collection and for autocomplete. It's pretty cool what you can come up with. Seb, I don't see any other questions. We are at the hour. Look, the questions we discussed today were not things we made up. They were submitted by you and by your colleagues to us over the past quarter. And it's thus never too late to get these questions to us. And if you ask them, I'll answer them just to you and you'll feel all special. And if it's a great question, we'll bring it back in 3 months. Maybe Alex got that in under the wire. Do you want to get that in there, Seb? If you need,
yeah, the question was about, can you filter something from the HCMS or from Excel and get the distinct values, so only the unique values? The answer is no, we don't have that filter at the moment.
Okay, there you go. Seb, thank you very much. I will see you as of October, November, December. Maybe this will be a Christmas present for everybody in December. So we don't have a date scheduled, but we will be meeting with you guys. Keep your questions coming. Thank you so much for your interest in and use of Intuiface. It's a pleasure to be with you guys. Seb, thank you very much as well.
Thank you, everybody. And again, if you have any questions that we did not answer today, remember we have our great support team in Europe and in the US. Do not hesitate to contact them, support@intuiface.com. If you want to pick the brain of the Intuiface users, you have the community.intuiface.com. Guys will be happy to share their great experience that they had over the years. And if you want a topic to be addressed in the next live Q&A, send us an email. You know how to reach out to us.
Yeah, if everybody was on the community, this meeting would be shorter because everybody would have seen our answers to the community questions. We've had to do them here. Seb, thanks so much. Thank you to everybody else. I will post the recording in no more than a day. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.